I'm Hillner, and I'm a lecturer in medieval history in this department. And I believe I'm right in saying that I deal with the earliest period that we cover, the late Roman world, which is roughly from the 4th to the 6th century. Now, I just said that I'm a lecturer in medieval history and I deal with the late Roman world, which sounds like a paradox to some of you who obviously, most of you, all of you will know ancient, medieval, modern are the categories that we're dealing with. But this paradox already sums up quite succinctly what late antiquity is, or rather is not. It is neither exclusively medieval nor exclusively ancient. In this period, we certainly see the establishment of Germanic kingdoms on the former territory of the Roman Empire, one of which was those that the Anglo-Saxons established here in Britain. And it's also true that at this time we see the rise of Christianity as something that the ruler of these states increasingly adopted as their religion. All that sounds really medieval, I'm sure you agree. But between the first Christian emperor, Constantine, who you see here, and the deposition of the last Roman emperor by a Germanic military general, more than 150 years passed, which by all reckoning is a very long period, in which much of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East were still under Roman rule. Now, late antiquity is therefore a period of change, a time of change, with many Roman aspects disappearing, such as, for example, the habit of going to the public bath, such as those who I'm sure you all know bathed in Roman Britain. But these aspects were disappearing slowly at a different rate across the empire. And it's still unclear why these changes happened. Now, take the example of the public bath. Did people stop going because of the disappearance of the technological knowledge of running a bath of this size? Or did they disappear because of Christian rejection of nakedness, or both, or none? These are the questions that kind of inspire late antique historians looking at this period. Because studying late antiquity means studying a period of change as a major example of that most crucial feature of history. And I think this is one of the reasons why we cover it so extensively here at Sheffield. But this is not the only thing. Studying late antiquity also provides a window into anxieties modern historians we have with our own world. Rarely indeed has a period been looked at with more moral judgment. For British historians of late antiquity, up to the mid-20th century, the crucial interest has been to understand the decline of empire, because the British had an empire themselves and were obviously clearly worried about losing it. Roman civilization was seen as infinitely superior to what came after, and the period of late antiquity, therefore, was seen as decline. Okay, by contrast, German historians of the same period, 18th to mid-20th century, often praise the Germanic kingdoms who came after for bringing new blood, new ideas to the decadence of Rome. Some Roman features that we praise as the theme here is not decline, but radical innovation. So some features that we see as civilization, such as public bath, were seen as a luxury that weakened society. And although these historians actually did not make the point, there is some truth in this, because bathing in unchlorinated water was actually probably quite significant in spreading disease around the empire. So, you know, not everything that was Roman was by definition also great. Okay, so that's Germans. Italian historians, inspired by Catholicism, looked attentively at the rise of the church as an inheritor of Roman values, such as reading and writing, education, transmission of ancient texts. These are the things that the church incorporated, and the theme here is, therefore, renovation of these values. These are all quite old ideas, and the current trend in late antiquity and late antique studies doesn't focus so much on this break between the old and the new as these historians have promoted, but on the overlap. In this period of change, it is believed people assumed many identities, or could assume many identities. They could call themselves Christians, but still perform pagan practices. They may be Roman by family, but wear Germanic dress, and so on. In short, late antiquity was multicultural. And you will not be surprised to hear that this trend has developed alongside closer European integration. So this trend in scholarship, and it's still kind of really what is defining late antique scholarship at this very moment. My particular interest within the period of late antiquity concerns the development of the city of Rome in this period, from the capital of the Roman Empire to the center of Western Christendom, which is the topic of my special subject, as Charles, I think, mentioned. So I'm not the first one who looks at Rome, at this city, as a symbol of the change that were taking place, in the Roman world as a whole in this period. Perhaps the most famous of my predecessors is Edward Gibbon, who you see here, a British gentleman of the 18th century, an MP and a historian. He wrote The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire in 1776, which is a clear product of the Enlightenment. And in his memoirs, Gibbon tells us that he got the idea for the book while in Rome, as part of his Grand Tour, which is kind of the 18th century version of the gap year, something that he shouldn't obviously be doing. So he says, it was at Rome on the 15th of October in 1764, as I sat musing amidst the ruins of the capital while the barefooted friars were singing vespers in the temple of Jupiter, that the idea of writing the decline and fall of the city first started to my mind. He says city, but he actually really means empire. Basically, he was upset that the most sacred place of the ancient city, the capital and hill, where the temple of Rome's most important god, Jupiter, had been located, had now been taken over by the church, the friars he alludes to, a type of monk, who just sang and left everything else around them go to ruins, as they did not care about this word. And he suddenly understood just why the empire had ended. In a nutshell, Christianity for him meant that people prayed and did not fight. Okay, so this is how Rome lost its empire. At this point, I have a question for you. Now, some of you may have been to Rome, but many of you may have not. But I think this city is so iconic that I'm sure all of you will be able to name an important ancient building in the city. Who wants to volunteer? The Colosseum, okay, Colosseum.
The Vatican.
The Vatican, okay, that's already into my period.
Trevi Fountain.
The Trevi Fountain, okay, that's an iconic building, it's not ancient, although it's actually the end of an ancient aqueduct.
Forum.
The Forum, okay, wanted to hear that. I think that's enough. What I'm going to show you now is how some of these looked like at the time of Gibbon. Okay, these are etchings by the Italian artist Gian Battista Piranesi, who faithfully chronicled the Rome of the mid-18th century, just when Gibbon came to visit. Now, looking at these ruins, some of which you have mentioned, the Colosseum up in the left, the Forum right next to it. Down there are the baths of Caracalla. I thought I'd continue with that bath theme, but you know, they all look quite derelict. So looking at these, we're beginning to understand Gibbon's despair. Once ancient Rome was great, now it was a shadow of its former self, sunken into the ground. You can see that clearly in the Forum, and loomed over by churches. So whose fault could that be? Now, no one these days looks at 18th century Rome anymore as an indicator of the city's decline over 1,000 years earlier. But Gibbon's story of decline of the city and its empire had a very long, very long following. Now, where Rome is concerned, the story has been told in very straightforward terms. At the beginning of the 4th century, Rome was an imperial city. In 350, the people of Rome erected a triumphal arch for their emperor Constantine, the one I mentioned at the beginning, with a massive inscription, a very Roman way of celebrating an emperor. And there were several triumphal arches on the Roman Forum. You may have just spotted them on that, matching that Piranesi image that I showed you. But after Constantine, Rome stopped being an imperial residence. Why this was so is still unclear, but one reason may be that it was too far away from the frontiers. The emperors were very busy fighting Germanic invaders and just didn't have time to be in Rome for much, for lengthy periods of time. Now, circa 100 years later, another triumphal arch was erected in Rome. This time, it was within a church, now called Santa Maria Maggiore, and it was celebrating the triumph, not of an emperor, but of Christianity. And its inscription, as you can see here, did not name an emperor, but celebrated the Pope, who seemingly had replaced the emperor as the patron of the Roman people. Now, my interest is, as that of Gibbon and all other historians of the late antique city, is to understand how we get from one arch to the other, how, like a phoenix, Rome reinvented itself as a Christian city. But unlike Gibbon, I don't think the story is so straightforward that after emperors lost interest, the Pope just picked up the pieces. I'm interested in how individual people in the city experienced and also influenced this change. And I'll just give you one example of one of the sources I am looking at, or you could look at, if you're kind of taking this approach. Now, while emperors did not live in Rome anymore in late antiquity, the city was still the residence of many wealthy aristocrats. The most wealthy people of the empire lived in Rome, and many of them followed Roman pagan religions, the state religion. And now they were slowly converting to Christianity. Now, you might say that this was quite normal and natural and automatic given that Rome was also the residence of the Pope. But the story is a little more complicated. Now, take this sarcophagus, a coffin, which, given its precious material and intricate classicizing artwork, must have been produced by a very wealthy aristocrat. The aristocrat was clearly Christian, as the artwork shows the life and death of Peter and Paul, Jesus Christ's most important apostles, who were also believed to have been martyred in Rome. Now, Peter, as I'm sure you know, of course, was also believed, or is often believed to have been the first pope, and I will bet we hear much more about this over the coming weeks of the papal election. What is striking, however, is, as the art historian Jess Elsner has recently shown, that this connection between Peter and Rome was first most strongly emphasized not in a church or in churches or on church kind of iconography, but on such aristocratic objects, where Peter looks very Roman and not at all like a Jewish fisherman. The Roman bishops embraced that ideology, that propaganda of Peter fully only about 100 years later, in the 5th century. And one could say that Christian aristocrats of Rome wanted to show that their city, as the place of death of this important person, played a crucial role for Christianity, so much as it had played and was still playing a crucial role for the empire, so matching Christianity and the empire in Rome. And as such, they were driving the cult of Peter, from which ultimately also the Pope benefited. So what we see at play here is, as in many of the sources of late antique Rome, is what I have called the overlap of identities in late antiquity, in this case, Christian and Roman. Of course, you will have understood by now which kind of school of thought I am following and I'm coming from. But I also would like to stress that this is not the end of it. Who knows how long this idea of multicultural transformation in late antiquity will last. I talked about European integration, maybe witnessing European disintegration, and other aspects will come to the foreground. But history is also this, to reflect on the past in light of the present, and the answers are ever changing. And we here at Sheffield, we very much like our students to be part of this reflective self-reflective process, and I think Rome is a wonderful place to start. Thank you.